Hi there, it's Paul Martin with College Money Method, and I'm here today to bring you a screen-by-screen walkthrough of the 24-25 FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. While there has been a delay in the launch this year, having just opened in January, I know there's a lot of concern about the new process and being successful in completing the application. This video will provide students every step they need to apply for federal student aid and help parents as contributors to the FAFSA process. We're going to go through all the requirements of the FAFSA as well as each screen and how to answer the questions. So let's get started. The FAFSA is important for three reasons. First, it determines your eligibility for all federal student aid programs, such as Pell Grant and Work Study. Two, it calculates your student aid index, which is the new terminology for your estimated ability to pay. This is important in determining your need-based eligibility versus the cost of attendance at a given college. Finally, it sends the FAFSA information and your student aid index to all the colleges you elect to receive it so that colleges can consider you for additional grants and scholarships from the university. Here is an important list of things each contributor needs to complete the FAFSA. For parents, they need their own FSA ID, needs to be created ahead of time, as well as a copy of their 2022 tax return. Any records for child support received in the full year prior to completing the application. To report parent assets, you'll need today's financial statements for checking, savings, brokerage, only those investments that are non-retirement, 529 plan for the student applicant, annuities and trusts. As part of parent assets, you also need to report equity value of any second properties you own. And parents that own a business or farm will need to report the net worth of their business or farm. Students need their own FSA ID, and if the student filed 2022 tax returns, it's helpful to have those returns handy. For students' assets, they'll need financial statements from their checking, savings, any other investment accounts, as well as trust or UTMA accounts that they are the beneficiary of. For dependent students, there's a new process to complete and submit the FAFSA. First, the student starts a new FAFSA by logging in with their FSA ID, adds information about themselves, and invites their parent contributors. She will then sign and submit her form. Once that parent is invited, her parent will receive an invitation to sign in with the parent FSA ID and complete their sections of the FAFSA. The parent will then be able to sign the FAFSA for full processing. It's important to follow this process because there can be conflicts if a student starts a new FAFSA and a parent also tries to start a new FAFSA, since there can only be one FAFSA form and submission per student. Now that the FAFSA is contributor based, we'll first log in as Raya the student to complete the student portion of the FAFSA application. Here at the Federal Student Aid website, we'll log in using Raya's FSA ID username, or she can use her email or phone number and the password she used to set up her FSA ID account. There's a step before the login is complete now, which requires Raya to send a code to either her phone number or her email address in order to authenticate her login using two-factor verification. Once Raya is logged in, we're going to start a new form. Raya is going to choose to complete or start the form as a student. There are 4 informational screens that are optional, which include videos on what the FAFSA form is, what contributors to FAFSA form mean, what to expect in completing the FAFSA and how long it might take, and finally, what to expect after submitting the FAFSA form. The first screen Raya sees is the identity information she's entered as part of her FSA ID, which includes date of birth, social security number, email address, and phone number. If any of these things need to be changed, Raya has to go to account settings at Federal Student Aid in order to change some of this key information. Permanent mailing address will also be included if Raya had put her permanent mailing address as part of the process of setting her FSA ID. In the case that wasn't part of the FSA ID creation process, Raya has the opportunity to include her permanent mailing address now. Raya is asked, based on the state used for her permanent mailing address, how long she's been a legal resident of the state. In the case that she's been a resident since her date of birth, we're going to include the month and the year of her birth. Next, Raya is asked to consent and approve for the IRS to transfer any information from her 2022 tax return to the Department of Education solely for the purposes of processing the FAFSA. Now, even though Raya may not have filed taxes in 2022, this consent is required in order for her to be fully processed for federal student aid and to be eligible for federal student aid as well as any other financial aid. The next series of screens will ask Raya about her personal circumstances. First is her marital status. Next, it's going to ask about her college plans in 24-25. Specifically, what college grade she'll be in the 24-25 academic year, and whether she had earned a bachelor's degree prior to her school year in 24-25. These are a series of personal circumstances that may or may not apply to Raya the student, and if any of these do apply to Raya, this will allow her to apply for federal aid without the need for parent information because it would consider her an independent student. Generally speaking, students are considered dependent on their parents if they are under the age of 24, they are not married, do not have their own children or other dependents, or none of these personal circumstances apply to that student under the age of 24. These include serving in the military or being a veteran of the military, having children or other dependents, being an orphan, ward of the court, or in foster care after the student has turned 13, or whether the student is legally emancipated or may be under legal guardianship of someone other than their parent or step-parent as determined by a court in their state of residence. If any of these personal circumstances apply to a student, then they will be able to complete the FAFSA without any parent information. Additionally, it asks Raya if she is at risk of being homeless or not. Finally, there is a questions about unusual circumstances Raya might be experiencing that prevent her from contacting or being in contact with her parents for purposes of completing the FAFSA. These unusual circumstances can include an abusive or threatening environment at home, estrangement from parents, or parents being incarcerated. If a student chooses yes for unusual circumstances, they are made a provisional independent student and will be able to complete the FAFSA as an independent student provisionally without parent information. However, once the FAFSA is received by a financial aid office at a specific college, that financial aid administrator is required to substantiate these unusual circumstances to approve the independent status. And if these circumstances cannot be documented and substantiated, then Raya will be asked to go back and complete her FAFSA as a dependent student and include parent information. So as we see, based on the answers Raya has provided, Raya is considered a dependent student and will have to invite her parent or parents to be participating and contributing to the FAFSA. The exception would be if Raya would only want to be considered for loans as a form of federal aid and not be considered for other types of financial aid, either from the federal government or from her college. If that would be the case, Raya only wants loans, she would be able to check yes and not include parent information. However, Raya does want to be considered for all types of financial aid, so she's going to choose no to only applying for a direct unsubsidized loan. The next series of screens will ask Raya about her parents. First is whether her biological or adoptive parents are married to each other. If it is the case that they're both married to each other, then Raya is asked to provide information about both parents so they can be invited to the forum. In the case that parents aren't married to each other, the next question is asking whether those biological or adoptive parents live together, because it is FAFSA rules that if parents are not married, whether they're separated, divorced, or never been married, but live together in the same household, then both parents do have to participate on the FAFSA. Now, in the case that Raya's parents are separated, but no longer live together, then the determination of which parent participates in the FAFSA will be based on the parent that provided the greater financial support in the past 12 months or in the 12 months just prior to submitting this application. Now, there are a lot of questions about how a student and parent can determine what is financial support. And Department of Education has purposely provided no specific guidance or definition of what they consider financial support to be. So it is up to the student and parent to determine what type of support is considered financial support, whether that includes housing, tuition, other types of financial support. That is up to the student and parent to determine. And once that has been determined, Raya would choose yes here. And then the final question would be whether that parent that provides the greater financial support has been remarried. In the case that parent has been remarried, then that new spouse or a step parent will also have to participate in the FAFSA. But in this case, Raya's mom, Alcina, has not remarried. So it's determining that only this one parent of the two biological parents needs to complete the FAFSA application. So now Raya will include information about this parent, including first name, last name, date of birth, and social security number. It's important that the initial information, first name, last name, date of birth, and social security number, match the parent's same information when the parent created their FSA ID. So that match can be made and the applications can join together. Once the invitation is sent to the parent, Raya can continue with her application. Now it's going to ask several questions about student demographics. The initial questions about student gender, as well as about student ethnicity and race, are optional questions that Raya can choose to answer or not. And these questions will only be used for purposes of survey at the level of the Department of Education. None of these questions about gender or race are sent to colleges in any way for determination of financial aid. Raya is asked about her citizenship status. She can be a US citizen, an eligible non-citizen. If she is an eligible non-citizen, she'll be asked for alien registration number. And then Raya is asked about the highest educational attainment for both of her parents. In this case, Raya's parents, neither of them attended college. And Raya is also asked if one of her parents had been killed in the line of duty. Raya is asked about her high school completion status prior to beginning her academic year 24-25 in college. In this case, Raya will have earned her high school diploma. And now Raya is asked to look for her high school information using the search functionality provided by the FAFSA. And now Raya is asked about her finances. Questions about finances have been greatly reduced because of the new ability for the IRS to share any information about Raya's income with Department of Education prior to this section. There may be some additional income questions that can appear depending on what type of information was sent over from the IRS. In most cases, students aren't going to see any questions about rollovers because they won't have a tax return that has been sent over, and therefore there won't be any information about distributions from their retirement accounts. But for the most part, specifically for senior students applying for the first time, all these questions will be zero. They won't have yet received college grants or scholarships, and they won't have earned foreign income. The final question about student finances is about student assets, where they're asked to report any amount in their checking and savings accounts, and potentially any net worth of their investments. These may include brokerage accounts that students have been invested in, or can be trusts that students are the beneficiary of, and they are expected to report the amount of trust they're the beneficiary of, including UTMA or UGMA accounts, regardless of whether they have access to that money today. Remember that any 529 plans the student is a beneficiary of will not be reported as a student asset. Those 529 plans may be reported as a parent asset depending on who owns those 529 plans that benefit the student. Finally, the student is asked about current net worth of any business or investment firms. Now, the final section for students is simply to select the colleges to which they want the FAFSA to be sent. On the new FAFSA form, students can include up to 20 colleges on their initial selection, which is an increase from last year, which was only up to 10 colleges. Students will go through a similar process of looking up colleges by state, city, and school name. Now, in this prototype, the database is limited, so we only have certain colleges to choose from. But please know that you are able to search for all colleges that a student may be applying for, as well as the fact that each college has a federal code. If you go to that college's financial aid website, you can look up the federal code and find colleges by their code as well. So in this case, I'm gonna select Wellesley College. And as I mentioned, there is the potential of looking up colleges by their code. We can see I have 1 out of 20 schools selected, and at any point I can follow the next tab to see which schools I have selected. After all colleges have been entered by the student, that's all there is. Now it's time for the student to review any information if they'd like to by using the down arrows to see what information is in specific sections. They can also go back to specific sections by clicking on the blue link and updating the information. We can see here, it shows that invitation has been sent to Raya's mom, Alcina. And once we've confirmed that, we can continue on to signature. Raya is expected to read the terms of applying for federal student aid and consent to those terms. And by checking the box next to her name and clicking the sign button, the application is considered signed by Raya. And now Raya's portion of the FAFSA has been submitted and an invitation has been sent to Alcina, her mom, for Alcina to complete the parent section in order for the application to be considered complete. Now that Raya has completed the student section of the FAFSA and sent an invite to her mom, Alcina, Alcina will receive an email asking her to contribute to the FAFSA to complete Raya's form so that Raya can be processed for all federal student aid and other forms of financial aid from colleges. One thing to note is that once the FAFSA has been started by the student, Raya, there are 45 days to complete the FAFSA. Forms have not been completed within 45 days. They will be erased and will have to be started over. Alcina is going to go ahead and choose to log in to her FSA account. Alcina will use her FSA ID and password to log in. This demo does not include the two-factor authentication, but it will ask Alcina to send a code to either her phone or email so that she can fully log in to federal student aid. Once logged in, Alcina will see on her My Activity page an invitation from Raya to help complete the FAFSA form and be a contributor. On accepting that invitation, Alcina, the parent, agrees to share information with the Department of Education. There are several initial screens helping Alcina understand what the form is, who contributors are, what to expect from the form, and what happens after submitting the FAFSA form. Alcina is expected to confirm all the identity information associated with her FSA ID account, which includes date of birth, social security number, email and phone number, and permanent mailing address if that was entered when Alcina created her FSA ID. If there is no permanent mailing address, or if Alcina needs to update that address, she can do it at this point. Now we're at the point where Alcina is asked to share any information from the IRS with the Department of Education regarding her 2022 tax return for FAFSA processing. And this is the heart of simplification, which means almost all income information required to complete the FAFSA will automatically be transferred from the IRS. This approval is required regardless of tax filing status of a parent. So without providing approval, a student, in this case Raya, would be ineligible for any federal student aid and most types of other financial aid. So Alcina chooses to provide consent, is now going to be asked a few demographic questions. The first question is about the parent or Alcina's marital status. Since Raya's mom and dad are still married, the form is asking for information about Raya's dad or Alcina's spouse. In the case that Raya's mom and dad, Alcina and Paul, file taxes jointly, then this information is only required to complete the FAFSA, and Paul will not have to participate and contribute additional information on the FAFSA. But in the case that Alcina and Paul may not file taxes jointly, this could be the case that they file separately or that they file any other status, then it will require Paul to create an FSA ID as well as log in to complete sections, including providing consent for the IRS to share any information about Paul's tax return in order to fully process the FAFSA. For more information on who needs to create an FSA ID and which parent needs to complete the FAFSA, you can go to collegemoneymethod.com, Family Resources, and read the guide to creating your FSA ID, which includes the rules for parents that have to create an FSA ID and participate on the FAFSA, as well as a link to how to create an FSA ID posted by the Department of Education. Now it asks for Alcina's legal state of residence. Alcina will also note the month and year in which she became a legal resident of the state of New York. We've moved on to questions about parent finances that Alcina has to answer. The first question is in regards to any federal means-tested benefits that Alcina or anyone in her family may have received in either 2022 or 2023. In the live version of the FAFSA, there are question mark bubbles which you can choose to read more about these benefits and whether you are one who may have received these benefits or someone in your family may have received these benefits. A parent that indicates they received any of these benefits in 2022 or 2023 will be exempt from having to report parent assets, and that screen will no longer appear as part of the parent financials. In this case, Alcina and her family have not received any federal means-tested benefits. This screen asks about the parent's family size. By default, the family size is determined by the number included in the 2022 tax return. This would include parents filed on the tax return that's been transferred by Alcina, as well as any dependents claimed by Alcina on her tax return. If you're unsure about the family size as determined by your tax return, it's recommended that you choose yes, your family size is different, so that you may be able to enter your own number. If this is the case, you are asked only to add additional dependents, whether they are children or other dependents, that live with you and will receive more than half support from you in the academic year 24-25. This would include any siblings of Raya that may be attending college while not living at home, but still fully dependent on Alcina. In this case, Raya has 2 siblings to include. Want to emphasize the importance of this question because family size is one of the biggest factors in determining eligibility for federal aid. Oftentimes, the number of dependents claimed on the 2022 tax return will not match the actual family size for the award year 24-25. This will not impact processing of the FAFSA or make your FAFSA application eligible for verification. FAFSA still continues to ask about the number in college in 24-25, even though the number in college no longer impacts eligibility for federal student aid. This information is simply passed to colleges. Now there are some supplemental questions asked about Alcina's tax return. And these questions are dynamic and may only show up if you have relevant portions of your tax return that relate to these supplemental questions. The IRA rollover question would only show up if you have had a distribution from your IRA in 2022. The pension rollover question would only show up if you've had a distribution from your pension in 2022. If you have had distributions that have been rolled into another qualified retirement account, it's important to put the rollover amount here so that the FAFSA will deduct that amount of rollover from the overall income that they are counting for FAFSA processing purposes. As well, they ask questions as to whether the parent, this case Alcina, has received any college scholarships, grants, or other AmeriCorps benefits. And finally, whether there has been foreign income earned that's been excluded from the tax form. There's a bubble here on the live FAFSA that will allow you to see where on your tax form on Schedule 1 this information is, and you're asked to enter the information here. The final question about parent financials are regarding child support received and parent assets. In the case that the parent filling out this FAFSA is receiving child support from a former spouse, they're expected to report the total amount of child support for all children received in the last complete calendar year. In our case, since we're completing the form in 2024, we would include the total amount of child support received in 2023, not the base year of 2022, which is the tax year used for purposes of income. There are 3 questions about parent assets. The first one simply asks the amount of savings and checking in your account balances today. We'd want to add up all checking and saving balances and report the amount as of today here. Next, it asks about current net worth of investments, which may include real estate, but never your primary home. So if you own additional real estate, second properties, or a second home, you would need to include the equity value here, along with other key assets, which may include 529 plan for the student applicant only, brokerage accounts. These are investments like stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, not in retirement, as well as CDs or other types of investments. We never report in this line any type of retirement account balances we have, health savings accounts, or life insurance policies. For a full list of investments to include and which not to include, click on the question mark icon. Finally, we're asked about current net worth of business or investment farms. If you own a business, this would be any tangible assets you have, the current market value of those assets, such as property you may own with your business, or machinery or equipment, minus any debt you have against those assets. In most cases, parents who have services businesses that have no tangible assets, the current net worth will be 0. We're already at the point where we're ready to sign the form as a parent. We can see an additional invite has been sent to Paul Tran, but in the case that Paul has filed taxes jointly with Alcina, Paul has to take no action on the FAFSA. The final step would be to continue, and here Alcina is asked to read the terms of submitting information for federal student aid processing through the FAFSA. By checking this box, Alcina agrees to the terms outlined above and provides an electronic signature. We've gotten to the completion screen, which shows that the parent section has been completed and submitted so that Raya can receive any federal aid she's eligible for, as well as any institutional aid the college may additionally consider her for. Raya can now go into her FSA account to look at the FAFSA submission status to make sure all contributors have completed their sections and that the FAFSA is submitted. It's important to note, if you're completing the FAFSA this January, that Federal Student Aid has announced that there will not be access to the FAFSA submission summary until sometime in early February. While the FAFSA is completed and has been submitted, students and parents will not be able to go back into the FAFSA to make any corrections until the FAFSA submission summary is available later in January or early February. For more information, you can go to studentaid.gov. There are resources directly from Federal Student Aid and the Department of Education. There are also additional resources at collegemoneymethod.com.